My first visit to Asia was 31 years ago, in 1981, when as a grammar school student, I went on a cultural tour. Well, would you believe that as a college junior, I went on a Peace Corps mission? All right. I was a 29-year-old, low-level financial auditor sent there for 3 months to audit the books and records and the operations of several businesses. Regardless, I can tell you it was an eye-opening experience for a guy at the beginning of his career who hadn't traveled much and was fascinated by the region. It took me to the Philippines, Japan, and Hong Kong, Macau before China had really opened up. Since that time, I've gone many times, and I'm consistently impressed with the verve and pace of the place. A sense of entrepreneurship, speed, hard work, looking forward, not backward, building for the future, and a commitment to education that pervades the atmosphere. That spirit was always there, and it has accelerated significantly as China opened and unleashed the creativity of 1.3 billion people. In my travels through Asia, I've been to 20 or 30 different countries. And in all of these countries, you feel that dynamism, that excitement about the future and where they're going, that feeling that everything is possible and everything is happening so fast, you had better decide now. As the region continues to grow and focuses on driving that dynamism and spirit of entrepreneurship, it can become an engine for the world. Now, if you're going to talk about Asia, you have to talk about China. China has the capability to grow much faster than global GDP for the next 50 years. If China grows at 7% and the US at 3%, it takes 25 to 30 years for China's economy to equal that of the US, and China would still have lower GDP per capita. For that to equalize, it could take another 25 to 30 years. In other words, a lot of runway ahead. Now, some will point to the unsustainability of the current political system to support that kind of growth. Now, I'm not a political scientist, but I'd guess that's probably true. What I would point to, though, is that every country, organization, company, or individual has to be able to evolve, to change and to meet and adapt to changing circumstances. And in that regard, China has shown tremendous capability. It was 50 years ago when, as kids, we had to sit around the dining room table staring for hours at a piece of inedible liver, while my mom said we'd sit there until bedtime because there were starving kids in China who would be happy to have it. Now, with no address or money for postage, we were unable to take her up on that enviable option. It was 20 years ago when I made my first trip to mainland China, traveling the countryside in a car with colleagues to call on potential customers, as we saw thousands of laborers with picks and shovels building new roads. Now, I wanted to buy a souvenir for my son, but I legally couldn't have RMB. And the only place I could buy something with dollars was at a state-sponsored store called Friendship Store No. 2, where I can assure you the employees were far from friendly. Today, many people believe China already is the world's biggest economy, and many view China's rising prosperity with concern rather than welcoming admiration for what they've done to raise the living standards of their people. Viewed in this light, it seems to me that we should be betting that China will be able to evolve their system to meet the changing environment and continuing to grow. Now, all of this is not to say that China growth will continue unimpeded for 50 years. Like any other country, something will go awry. It could be a rising middle class wanting more of a say than the government is willing to give, or a fracture between rich and poor, country or city, or a problem with Taiwan. That being said, we should bet on their capability to evolve. The implications for the US are that we need a more comprehensive and nuanced relationship with China. It's not a case of is China good or is China bad. Rather, it's a case of China is. I've sometimes likened it to how the UK probably felt about the US 150 years ago. We had a lot more people, a dynamic, relatively equal opportunity society. We were growing rapidly. We're the ones who had problems with intellectual property theft, and we strongly encouraged and celebrated business. We made the right decisions, evolved with the times, and became the biggest, most prosperous economy in the world. It's very possible that China could do the same. It doesn't mean everything that China does is right. We should object to those issues like intellectual property theft that are still problems. At the same time, we should be a lot more welcoming of Chinese investment in the US. It's good for our economy. And I like the idea of another Chinese voice in Beijing who is able to say something like, hey, what are you doing? I have a lot of money invested over there. It's much better for us and the world to argue commercially rather than militarily. Now, as a company, we've invested based on our belief in these trends. We've gone 10 years ago from $300 million in sales to over $2 billion today, primarily for China consumption. Employment in China during that time has gone from 1,000 to over 12,000, with increasing sophistication in management and technical capability. We're a believer in that long-term trend. And by the way, we make pretty darn good money there while we're at it. We also believe that our next big global competitors are coming from there also. They're likely to be in China, so we spend a lot of time on becoming the Chinese competitor so we can beat Chinese competitors in China rather than having them beat us here in the US. To accomplish this, we've used a couple of my learnings from 30 years of international travel and being in business. The first is that there always seems to be questions about how to deal with the culture of a country. And I'd say many people make it way too complicated. If you just treat everyone with basic respect and common courtesy, it's amazing how many cultural lapses you're allowed. And interestingly, as Americans, we also get the benefit of the doubt because we're not presumed to know that much about other cultures in the first place. The second is that a country's culture is not homogeneous. It sounds obvious, but many of your own employees in a country will want to say something to you like, you can't have Honeywell values here because they run counter to the culture. As an example, I can remember we needed to hire about 500 people in China during one of my first years in the job. The China general manager at the time was insistent we couldn't reinforce our Honeywell culture in the process. So I recall asking him some questions that went as follows. 1, do all people in China think the same way? The answer, of course not. 2, are there 1.3 billion people in China? The answer, yes. 3, is there a chance that in that 1.3 billion people, there are 500 of them who think like us? The answer was, I guess so. My response, good, find me those 500 people. Not only did we find those 500 people, but we found about 8,000 more since, and that's why we have such a robust Honeywell culture in China. I'm a big fan of China's rising prosperity through commercial strength and what they can do to also increase the prosperity of the world. And it's been fun and exciting for me to go over there over these past 30 years. And our growth as a company has been extremely fulfilling. It really has been a blast. So there's nothing that can make it better than to receive this award tonight. Thank you.